Hey guys, sorry for being a few minutes off schedule. We were in a meeting talking about the joy of fillable PDFs and the world the world of government data. Speaking of which, we have my friend Quinten about to come on board here. Quinten is a clinical fellow and adjunct professor at Suffolk, where they do lots of amazing things. But one of the projects I'm hoping he'll talk a little bit about is the assembly line project that they did during the pandemic, and sort of how they managed to work with the courts to have them accept what they're sending over. I don't know, Quinten, if you're going to talk about that.
Absolutely, yes.
So, all right.
Yep.
I'll let you go. I'll get out off stage.
Okay, I will start this little screen share here. All right. So Nicole has introduced me. I'm just going to make sure I can get to, let's see, the right screen. All right. So as Nicole said, my name is Quinten Steenhuis. I'm at Suffolk University Law School in Boston in the Legal Innovation and Technology Lab. And I'm going to talk with you today about standards, data standards, and other kinds of standards, and through the context and lens of the Document Assembly Line Project. So the Document Assembly Line Project was a pandemic response project that we started right when I started at Suffolk in March, which was the same week that the campus went on lockdown. And it wasn't just Suffolk, even though that's where it was housed. Here's just a few of the people who participated in it, including Theory and Principle, folks like Mass Law Reform Institute and Greater Boston Legal Services, which was my own home, were big players in the project as well. And we had a number of volunteers from all over the world. We actually had as many as 200 folks who participated from 5 different continents. I think the number was 11 time zones. My lab director, David, likes to use that number, which I think is kind of a cool one as well. So what actually was it? Well, as you might guess from the fact that we're at a forms conference, it was a forms project. So what we did is we took, there were just so many forms that existed in Massachusetts only as paper forms, that they were locked up on paper. There hadn't been an automated version of them of any kind. There weren't even fillable PDFs for most of these. And we knew that with the courthouses being physically closed for people coming in, that was not going to cut it. So we decided to work on that project. And we took about 30 processes that were emergencies where the court was actively trying to hear those cases. And we moved them into step-by-step digital online forms that were interactive. This is an example of one of the first ones that we did. And really importantly, at the end of that process, when someone got to the last screen for at least these emergency forms, we got the agreement of the trial court to accept them electronically. And the way that we started that project and what we could do the most efficiently and quickly at the beginning was to do that by secure email. So you can see here, this is the ending screen where someone can send a signed and completed form right to the court from within that guided form process. So where do standards fit into this discussion? So we use standards a lot. We were trying to coordinate the work of 200 folks who had very varying levels of skill and abilities and knowledge about the platform that we chose to use, which was DocAssemble. And so we really needed to have standards, standardized processes from how we went from the beginning of a form to the end of a form, being ready to launch and make it live. We needed, as much as possible, we tried to templatize the structure and format of our interviews. So rather than having 30 unique, beautiful snowflake forms, we wanted them to have a standard look and feel. So they would be something that we could agree on how they looked and not have to start over from scratch designing each one. We worked on standardizing the elements of the interviews too. So down to the level of like how you ask for someone's name, how you ask for someone's address, and making those reusable components so they weren't having to even be rewritten or copied and pasted, that they were literally just put in place in the right place when someone used our process to put them in there. Variable names and conventions around how we named variable names that were unique. And then electronic filing is the last part of the standards discussion. And depending on how much time I have, I'll be able to talk about that a little bit more detail, but we may not get to that today. Here is what our standard process looks like. So this is a Kanban board, which some of you have seen and some of you have not. It's a really common part of the agile development process. And it was the thing that made our project work with all these volunteers. Each of these cards that you see, these little square boxes, represents a form, and the various lists or columns that you see them in tell you what stage of the process they were in. So as a form moved from the left to the right, that means it's closer to being released to the public. It's at some stage of maybe review or being edited or being tested, and eventually it's ready to go live. That way we could see easily where things are getting bogged down, where things were going efficiently, and where we needed more help, or maybe to rethink the process or break one really long list into 2 steps so it's more easy to see what part isn't working. And the next part of this is I think we call the exhibit principle, which is why not automate the process of doing document automation? If it's good for a user to have an automated document, why are we reinventing the wheel and building our interviews from scratch? A lot of the drag and drop platforms do require you to do a lot of that, but by choosing DocAssemble as our base, we were able to automate and templatize the actual process of building an interview. And we built a tool that we called the Assembly Line Weaver, which was our secret weapon to be able to get from a labeled form, either a PDF or a Word document, really quickly to a prototype that you could run and interact with and test and get some real feedback from to see like where it needed to be improved and get advice and input from a subject matter expert. And the next part of that, as I said, we went down from a level, not just the template of the step-by-step form, but then we got to the level of this individual components that you could use and that were reusable. So thinking about this a lot like working with Legos, you drop a block in place that has that standardized work has been done to it. So that meant that we weren't having to reinvent how to ask for these standard types of concepts. Things like the signature screens were a component that was the same in every interview. The button and the interaction to get something to the court, the introduction screen, the way that was structured, and the follow-ups. And we had some really nice design help too. And I think one of the things we're working on for our next wave of forms is really to get some of the next steps that itself to be templatized. And actually Rose, who spoke at the beginning, was one of the designers who helped us work on that. So that's kind of what we did. Now I want to just turn the focus to standards and how those fit in and why they matter. Obviously, it's great to have standards. The wonderful thing about standards, as they say, is that there's so many of them to choose from. But why do we care about them as form developers, and why should you be thinking about them for your next project? So one of the things that was touched on in some of the other presentations is this idea of having consistency. Things can be beautiful and nice, but having consistency, having common interface and user experience across forms is really important for our users who come to us with already sometimes heavy cognitive burdens, right? So they're dealing with a stressful life situation, and the less that they have to figure out how to use your snazzy, cool thing, the better. So the more that we can work together to think about how these interviews are structured, I think we're all going to benefit and our users are going to benefit. When we're standardizing in the ways that I just talked about, we can get economies of scale as well. So we're doing all this discovery work independently in our silos to figure out the right way to do these different processes, which are just shared in all of these projects. And conferences like this are one of the great ways that we share information. And there's all other kinds of resources and ways that happens as well. Mailing lists and the ITC conference, I think, is a great place people share. But the more that we actively decide we're going to collaborate and we're going to think about how to standardize these things, I think the more of that benefit we get. And when we are looking at the way that we, at a really granular level, we might be able to benefit from shared knowledge. I mentioned we had some feedback and assistance and advice from the Bentley University team that was on the second slide. And that was really because of the Boston connection. But why can't a legal aid in Idaho benefit from that experience and having the same way that we learned how to write a question for asking someone's address and their name and get that the same way without having to get that expert information about how to ask that the right way, or to redo the user testing that isn't necessarily different between our different states. And the next part of it is really the Trojan horse, I think, right? So the more that we can standardize around things like variable names and conventions and the data we collect and how they're collected, we can get to a world where we're not just sending a PDF to a court that then gets printed out and put on a paper file, but we're sending over structured data that then can be used later by a court if they're savvy enough, a funder like Pew, who's funding some of our work, by a legal aid entity who may be sending this information over and wants to benefit from learning more about the people that they're serving and how they can do a better job serving them. And if we get to that world where we're not just sending over an image of a form, but we get to a world where we're sending over structured data in a standardized way, we're all going to benefit from being able to know more about the value of our work and be able to see how it can be improved and help more people in the future. All right, so that was a lot of information that I just shared there, I realize. I'm going to put up just a couple more slides. So one is, here's this question that I hope we can talk about a little bit more. It was so impressive and so it was so gratifying to see so many people volunteer to work together on this project. And it was a moment in time where a lot of people were ready to find a way to volunteer. But I hope we don't need a crisis to collaborate and to move some of these standards questions forward. And the last thing I'll do is I'll just put up our information so that you can reach us if you want to connect later and to talk about some of these issues. I will be around for the rest of the conference, and other members of our team are here too. So I'll call out David Colarusso, who's our lab director. Michelle, I know, is here from Code for Boston, who's one of our essential team members, and then Bryce Willie. So I think any of us would love to talk with you more about the project and how we can work together to build standards. Our next step is to take the e-filing piece, which we think worked really well as email for a user, but not as well for the court, and to turn that into e-filing that's integrated with case management systems. So we're being funded to do that work by Pew. We will be becoming an electronic filing service provider for the Tyler case management system. And the work that we produce there is going to be open and freely available to the world. And we'd love more folks to be able to do court integrated e-filing in a way that both courts and users and legal aid entities and providers like us can all get behind and be excited about. So I'm going to stop there. And I'm not sure what to do next. Oh, Nicole, you're back. You're going to help us.
I'm back. Yes. Thank you so much, Quinten. And I truly, watching this project come together was amazing. The amount of volunteers who came together and the amount of time they gave from all corners of the sort of legal community was amazing to watch. So kudos to you guys. And if you're not watching what Suffolk Lit Lab's doing, you definitely should, because not only are they doing really interesting projects, they're also sharing what they've learned with the rest of the community, which I think is really important. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
So we have a little more time. We have this show running until 3:30, so you can feel free to stay and mingle. That's the end of the programming. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for bringing all of your great ideas and your perspectives. And we'd love to have feedback on how this conference was for you. And so if in the future we hold other conferences, we can continue to make them better. But thank you, everybody, for showing up. Thank you to all the speakers, and we'll see you next time. Although it sounds like I'm ending it. I'm not ending it. We're going to go chat now.